Discovered, the inspiring moment a CEO millionaire was transformed by a woman cleaning for food. Jake Reynolds, the self-made CEO of a tech empire worth millions, stood at the entrance of a dilapidated apartment complex in East San Jose, the stark contrast between his perfect world and this reality hitting him like a cold splash of water. The smell of stale food and damp carpets filled the hallways, a striking reminder that success often comes at a steep cost. He had sacrificed everything for this lifestyle: a private jet, extravagant parties, and a bank account that never stopped growing. Yet, as he walked through the dimly lit corridors, shadows of emptiness followed him, gnawing at the edges of his pristine facade. Inside, he encountered Maria, a single mother intent on scrubbing every inch of a worn-out floor, her faded uniform contrasting sharply with his slick suit. Her exhaustion mirrored a fierce determination that captivated him. Maria shared tales of long nights navigating multiple jobs to keep her children fed. Each word was a vivid brushstroke, painting a picture of relentless struggle and resolve, a portrait of someone who fought tooth and nail against a system that threatened to grind her down. As she spoke, he felt a churning within himself, a voice whispering that his relentless pursuit of success had blinded him to the virtues of resilience and sacrifice. Here was a woman who embodied values he had long abandoned. While his days were filled with board meetings and profit margins, Maria's world teemed with authenticity, a rawness that provoked a growing discontent within him. He found himself questioning the very foundations of his success. Was he simply a hollow figure, surrounded by the spoils of capitalism, yet devoid of purpose? Could it be that the victories he held so dear were nothing more than a gilded cage, isolating him from the real struggles of life and the deeper connections he craved? As days passed, Jake found himself drawn back to the apartment complex under the guise of community outreach, each visit forging a bond with Maria that unraveled something deep inside him. Yet, with this connection came conflict, especially when a scandal erupted within his company. Questions of malfeasance were being whispered in boardrooms, threats of exposure loomed large, and he was standing on the precipice of a disaster that could shatter everything he had painstakingly built. An internal battle raged: should he shield this corporate empire, a monument to his sacrifices, or risk it all to defend Maria, who symbolized the very integrity he had taken for granted? Before we continue, I need to tell you about something important that's happening. YouTube has been making changes to the system and many people are losing notifications from channels they follow. If you're enjoying the content, click the bell and mark all notifications so you don't miss the next videos. And if you can leave a like, it really helps with reach. Seriously, it makes a difference. Oh, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I'm always curious to know who's on the other side of the screen. Now let's continue. With each passing hour, the tension mounted. Maria, once a beacon of hope, was now embroiled in her own crisis, facing the threat of losing her job for daring to speak out against exploitation. He had become her ally, but now he was also her potential betrayer. The anguish wrapped around him like a vice, squeezing tighter with each heartbeat. The doubts preyed on him, whispering that perhaps he was no longer capable of real courage. Could he stand up for the woman who had opened his eyes to the truth about living? Would he allow his empire to crumble for the sake of someone showing him the beauty of community and integrity? As he stood in that dimly lit hallway, a whirlwind of conflicting emotions surged through him. Desperation clawed at the edges of his mind, mingled with a fierce determination to finally embrace what truly mattered. But as he felt the weight of his impending decision, shadows of his past echoed, louder than ever, taunting his potential for courage, leaving him teetering between safety and sacrifice. Would he step into the light and confront his fears, or retreat further into the fortress of his success, where emptiness awaited him in silence? The clarity of his choice hung palpably in the air, unresolved, leaving Jake hanging in a liminal space of urgent anticipation, desperate for resolution yet terrified of the consequences. The room felt claustrophobic, shadows looming over Jake's shoulders as he weighed his options. He could no longer avoid the gnawing discomfort crawling beneath his skin. The thought of remaining in the safe cocoon of corporate success, while the world around him degraded into cynicism and exploitation, filled him with repulsion. This had not been the man he aspired to be, nor the leader he desired to embody. Maria's words echoed in his mind, a constant drumbeat that pushed against the walls of his complacency. How could he defend the actions of his company, when its practices endangered the lives of those like her? Images of her wayward smile amidst her struggles collided with memories of lavish parties and hollow interactions. The dichotomy felt irreconcilable. Unable to sweat the details any longer, he decided to plan a meeting with the board. No more pretend outreach. They had to confront the allegations head-on. The truth demanded it, if not for his sake, then for Maria's. He pictured his colleagues, their cold, calculating eyes assessing their positions, ready to circle the wagons around their profits rather than acknowledge their persistent failures. But the stakes were higher than just corporate profits. He had a moral obligation now. As he replayed every conversation with Maria, an unfamiliar resolve coursed through him, nudging him toward action. He could either reinforce the same old patterns or seek redemption by forging a new path that embraced transparency over greed. The thought of empowerment surged through him. He hadn't felt this alive in years. As he sat alone in the boardroom, a sprawling table of polished wood radiating dominance, the rising tide of adrenaline surged. He prepared himself mentally, the voices of dissent screaming from the corners of his consciousness. Doubt still lingered. Was he truly prepared to challenge decades of ingrained habits? Every instinct screamed at him to backtrack, to compromise for the sake of stability, yet an inner voice demanded otherwise. His ever-present fear was running out of excuses. When the board members filed in, Jake locked gazes first with Samantha, the CFO, who wore an expression that was both wary and condescending. "I hope this isn't about the recent rumors affecting our public image," she began, her tone crisp, as if already deciding on the response to a potential non-issue. His heart raced. "No, this isn't just about rumors. I need us to have an honest discussion. The exploitation of our workers is real and damaging. We have to do better." His voice quaked with emotion, shocking even himself. Confidence replaced the static weight of his earlier fears. Murmurs filled the air, and he could feel the tension thickening. "Jake, we've built this business," Samantha countered, but he interrupted her. "No, we've built an empire on the backs of people like Maria, and I won't stand for it any longer." The words stumbled out, raw and urgent, setting fire to the pending inquisition from the board. For the first time in years, he found himself confronting not merely the reactions of his peers but the overwhelming weight of his conscience. He witnessed the shifting dynamics in the room. Surprise gave way to discomfort and outright derision. Yet, amidst their skepticism, there was a flicker of respect. Perhaps this was the emotional turning point he needed to ignite change, not just within the corporation, but within himself. Rethinking his goals, Jake leaned forward, fists clasped on the table, as the vision of Maria's endured struggles rose above the crowd. This moment was about more than corporate ethics. It was a revelation of his own humanity. What he hadn't anticipated was the escalating spiral of ambition rising within him, igniting a fire for advocacy he never knew resided there. Would he prevail against the tide, or was this just the beginning of a tumultuous journey? The answers lay ahead, tangled in the chaos of boardroom politics and personal integrity, as every moment swelled with possibility, pushing him deeper into uncharted territory, each choice reverberating with far-reaching implications for both himself and Maria. As doubt assailed him again, he resolved to fight fiercely, holding tightly to the flickering flame of purpose ignited within. But little did he know, outside the boardroom doors, Maria was contemplating her next steps, and the impending revelations would come at a cost neither of them fully understood. The air in the boardroom felt electric, every moment stretching into slow motion. Jake absorbed the disbelieving expressions of his colleagues, their astonishment mingling with a hint of horror. He could sense the impending pushback, a well-rehearsed defense mechanism kicking in among the board members. They grasped for reasons to dismiss the guilt settling over their shoulders like a heavy cloak. But what had unlocked within him was a sense of purpose so profound, he no longer wished to retreat. Clearing his throat, Jake's voice rose above the murmurs, a steadiness emerging as he spoke. "We are responsible for the fates of many, and I cannot continue this farce. We must repeal the outdated protocols that justify exploitation. He expected another rebuttal from Samantha or one of the other board members, but the silence left behind was deafening, almost mocking in its stillness. He could see their faces wrestle with the discomfort of his claims. It was as though he had abandoned the scripted narrative they clung to, replacing it with something unpredictable and exhilarating. Jake felt emboldened by his own defiance, not just against them but against the very idea that success could derive from complicity in harm. This began to morph into a movement within himself, an uprising of moral clarity radiating from the core of his being. I propose a company-wide initiative, he continued, that prioritizes transparency and fair wages. We need to face our shortcomings head-on. For once, our profits should reflect ethical responsibility. The words spilled from him with an authenticity he hadn't realized he possessed. An unexpected assertion of conviction to disrupt the corporate status quo fueled him. However, the apprehension on the faces before him told him they were not as ready for change. Matthias, the COO, leaned back, arms crossed defiantly. And how do you propose we remain competitive while doing so? These ideas sound fantastic, but reality says otherwise. We risk everything. Jake's resolve faltered momentarily. Painful questions invaded his thoughts. Would they really turn against him to protect their interests? Suddenly, his eyes once again conjured images of Maria, persevering amid chaos, a symbol of resilience elevated above the material trappings he had grown accustomed to. The weight of his privilege felt heavier than ever, and he could no longer justify maintaining the existing framework. I refuse to prioritize profit over principles, he declared sharply. If we can't redefine our corporate identity, we are unworthy of leading this industry. Rage simmered beneath his calm facade, pushing him further into a contentious territory that laid bare the ethical breaches they had ignored for too long. After a tense moment, he broke eye contact and glanced around the room. A strange sense of vulnerability shifted within him, leaving him both terrified and liberated. Would this be his rallying point or his downfall? He needed to be prepared for any fallout, should the group decide to distance themselves from his newfound fervor. Samantha finally stood, her posture stiff. Jake, your passion is commendable, she said, her voice wavering slightly. But be mindful, defiance carries consequences. Perhaps we can consider a revised proposal that emphasizes gradual shifts. She offered him a lifeline, an avenue to temper his zeal and reinforce the familiar corporate framework. The transitional offer felt like a betrayal of the empowered conviction he had unearthed. To accept it would strip away the authenticity of his pursuit. Yet, his pulse quickened as the pressure mounted on his shoulders. He ran through the calculations in his mind, weighing the personal costs against the potential for transformation. Was he willing to stake everything on this fight for integrity? As he formulated a response, the fleeting thought of Maria slipped into his mind again. Forcing the tumultuous storm within him to settle, he realized that this moment, this choice was about articulating a rebellion for not just himself, but for her and the many who stood in her shoes. He had the power to effect change. With a clenched jaw and renewed determination, Jake met Samantha's gaze. I'll stand firm in my proposal. We cannot afford to be complicit any longer. A wave of silence washed over the room, and he felt the future of his team shifting, evolving into something uncertain yet promising. As the board conferred in hushed tones away from his piercing stare, Jake found himself confronting the path of leadership that lay ahead, one that demanded immense courage and relentless dedication. The familiar pang of uncertainty washed over him, rooting him deep in the reality of his choices. But just outside the room, a text buzzed on his phone. It was a message from Maria. I need to talk. There's something you should know. The word struck him like a jolt, awakening a realization of urgency that beckoned him beyond the walls of corporate backlash and into a personal reckoning that could change everything. Jake stepped out of the boardroom, the oppressive atmosphere lingering in his chest like a vice. The weight of his decision pressed heavily, yet a strange exhilaration coursed through him. Each step felt deliberate, a newfound authenticity guiding his path. A single thought consumed him: how could he make this matter resonate with their actions without compromising his resolve? His heart raced as he scanned the corridor for any sign of Maria. Her message echoed in his mind. Just as he began to question whether he should await her approach, a flicker of movement caught his eye. She approached, carrying both urgency and a hesitant smile. Beneath her casual demeanor lay an undeniable tension, perhaps even a trace of hope. "Jake," she breathed, her eyes pleading for his attention. "I'm so glad you're here. I was worried you might be stuck in that room, with them." He gestured for her to walk with him, leading her down the quiet hallway. "What is going on?" "Your text," it sounded urgent. Maria took a deep breath, aware of the gravity behind her words. "It's about the cleaning initiative I was part of last year. It's been under attack. The corporate leadership wants to cut support for programs that help the workers, my colleagues. They think it'll save them money." Shock rolled through Jake. This was not merely an organizational overhaul he could brush aside, it hit homes, families, similar to the wounds he had just exposed in that boardroom. The implications gnawed at him, intensifying the resolve that had ignited moments before. "Tell me everything," he urged, adrenaline sharpening his focus as he leaned in closer. Maria recounted stories, dropping names of friends caught in a bind, the same friends who had given their all, working volatile schedules beneath oppressive contracts. Each tale resonated with his growing understanding of corporate responsibility. Her narrative unspooled a world that he barely acknowledged, a world he could no longer ignore. "I can't just sit back," he said, feeling a tangible force charge through him. "I have to step back in there and fight for this." But a disquieting thought flickered in his mind. Was he truly ready to go up against the very board that had been his professional family? Maria's gaze locked onto his, her determination mirroring his own. "You've already taken a step toward change, Jake. You must support those who are affected. By pushing through your proposal, you'll do this. Together, we can lift their voices." Her confidence bolstered his resolve. His instinct was to plan, to strategize how he could change the narrative inside that boardroom, yet he only felt the urgency to act. Prepping for courageous confrontation over boardroom politics seemed trivial, almost selfish in comparison to the very real suffering of those workers Maria spoke of. "Let's make it real," Jake said, infused by the surreal connection forming between them. "We can create awareness, maybe even meet with the workers directly. It'll give my proposal the weight of lived experience." He felt transformed not just by the ethical implications of his decisions but by the purpose woven into every action Maria had taken, which unwittingly inspired him. They began to brainstorm practical steps about how to unify their efforts, each idea igniting an intense passion stirring within him, and he realized the empowerment rising not only belonged to him, but also to everyone at stake. Yet, as they delved deeper into their plans, a shadow of doubt began to flicker in the back of Jake's mind. He wondered if he could pull this off. Could he, as a corporate leader, authentically represent those who looked to him for guidance? The fear that his efforts wouldn't amount to genuine change began to rear its head, mingling with the hope that had ignited his spirit. Taking a deep breath, he looked at Maria with fierce conviction. "We'll do this together. No compromises." This commitment solidified his decision to grapple with the real struggles of marginalized workers. But as they delved further into strategizing, the tension brewing in his gut began to fester. What would the board's response be? He braced himself for battle, not just for his colleagues but for every voice silenced. Yet, as they walked back toward the boardroom, a thought struck him, deep and unsettling. A confrontation was inevitable. But how would he handle Matthias, who thrived on dominance and control? The moment of truth was approaching, and he realized he would have to confront not just his colleagues but his own fears. Jake's heart raced again. How far would he need to go to reclaim not just his career, but his integrity? The moment of truth was looming, and the stakes had never felt higher. Jake and Maria moved with purpose back toward the boardroom, their minds churning with strategies and intentions. Every step felt like a commitment to the gravity of their mission, but as they approached the familiar, imposing doors of corporate power, a shadow of doubt clung to Jake's thoughts. Moments ago, the exhilaration of change surged through him like fire. Now, it flickered, threatened by uncertainty. What if the table turned? What if Matthias countered his arguments before they even saw the light of day? Jake cleared his throat, focusing on the tangible urgency of the situation rather than allowing himself to dwell on fearful scenarios. "We'll walk in strong," he said, attempting to reassure himself. "But we need to be prepared for resistance." Maria nodded, her eyes bright with determination. "We have their vulnerabilities. They're afraid of bad press. We can leverage that." It struck Jake then, the idea that even in the heavy veneer of corporate leadership, there existed cracks where a few well-placed truths could seep in. But how could he align that with his evolving identity? Are we ready to tell their stories? To bring the reality of those workers into this boardroom discussion? Jake pressed, his voice barely above a whisper. It dawned on him that the situation was more than just corporate politics, it was a living tapestry of individual struggles and resilience. Maria smiled, a blend of compassion and resolve. "They deserve to be seen, Jake. And we need to channel that into our presentation. Facts and figures won't carry weight if they're not tied to real lives." Jake's heart raced not just with anticipation but the dawning realization that this venture was as much about him as it was those he fought for. Striving for authenticity, he felt a ripple of determination surge within him. He allowed that intensity to push aside the remnants of self-doubt taunting him. As they prepared to present the plan, the energy shifted, ideas morphed into actionable commitments. Queries and insights poured back and forth, revealing angles Jake had not yet considered. Maria's relentless questioning pushed him deeper into his own motivations. What was becoming clearer was not just the need for change but the personal growth he was navigating beside it. He could feel a different component of leadership emerging from within himself, the ability to empathize, to offer a hand upward rather than merely enforce policy. With newfound clarity, he unearthed an instinct to lead differently, to transform the narrative threading through their corporate culture. In the sea of polished suits and sterile conference rooms, he could be a different kind of executive, a mentor, an advocate. "Maybe it's not just about pushing the proposal," Jake proposed, his voice steadying. "What if we create a dialogue? A whole new engagement where employees feel safe sharing their experiences. It could empower more than just this initiative." Maria's eyes widened, and a smile broke across her face. "Yes. That gives our proposal the depth it needs. A candid dialogue will transform the board into a space where workers feel acknowledged. We can pave the way for revolutionary change." They both leaned forward, caught in the excitement of the idea. But even in that moment of clarity, a new tension emerged for Jake. Would he be able to bridge both worlds, the accounting of corporate necessities and the ethos of compassion? Could he truly stand up to Matthias, to voice not only his insights but those of the workers without faltering? As they entered the boardroom, the air thickened with anticipation. Jake caught a glimpse of Matthias and the rest of the leadership team, their faces' expressions etched with skepticism and authority. He gulped, steeling himself for his upcoming confrontation. It was time to unearth his own power and redefine leadership. But was he bold enough to face the complexities that true integrity would demand? The door had swung open, leaving domination and authenticity in a delicate balance. The time had come to face not just Matthias, but the relentless echo of Jake's own fears. Would he rise transformed, or would the corporate machine crush the very essence he now sought to protect? The air was thick with the tension of expectations as Jake stood at the head of the boardroom table, a glossy presentation behind him, yet the slides felt pale compared to the gravity of what lay ahead. Matthias leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, a subtle smirk curling at the corners of his mouth. Jake swallowed hard, a familiar feeling of dread clashing with a burgeoning resolve. Here was the moment that would either validate his recent transformation or sink him back into the shadows of corporate conformity. "Let's cut to the chase," Matthias began, his tone a blend of disdain and authority. "We're not interested in touchy-feely tactics. The bottom line matters. What's your play here?" Jake's heart raced. The old Jake would have quaked, backpedaled, or contrived a fact-driven response steeped in compliance and rivalry. Instead, as if an invisible force propelled him, he answered, "The play is to understand the voices behind our numbers. To create real conversations that can reshape our entire business model." The words came out stronger than he anticipated, resonating with an honesty that caught even him off guard. He felt Maria's encouraging presence at his side, grounding him as he took a deep breath, capturing the room's attention. "We have a responsibility to those who make this company run. Their stories, their struggles, they are the cornerstone of our success. If we ignore them, we ignore our potential for greatness." Matthias narrowed his eyes, the skepticism morphing into something akin to irritation. "You really believe that? The employees who barely meet their quotas are going to be the driving force of innovation?" Jake felt the sharp sting of the comment, but instead of retreating, a quiet fire ignited. "They are the true experts of their roles, it's just that they haven't been given a platform to express it. Let me be candid, so far, this room has felt more like a bubble where we overlook the grit of reality. That cannot be our future." In that charged moment, Jake realized he wasn't just advocating for a corporate initiative, he was reformulating his identity as a leader. The fear of being crushed by Matthias began to dissipate, replaced by a vision of the voice he wanted to embody. Was leadership about uplifting the unseen? "Imagine the shifts we can create," Jake continued, his belief cascading through each word. "What if we invested not just in policies but in our people? What if their voices could bring us solutions we never even considered?" Murmurs rippled across the table. Jake noted the shift, even Matthias's eyes flickered with something curiosity. Concern. Maria leaned closer, nodding subtly. "We can pilot a program that facilitates open forums," she interjected, her tone lively. "Real feedback loops, where employees are encouraged to share insights without fear of repercussions. This could redefine our employee experience and boost morale, even aligning them with business goals." "But how do you measure that impact?" Matthias challenged, still defensive, but Jake sensed a loosening grip on authority. "We'll track participation rates and follow up with performance metrics," Jake replied, allowing himself to envision a workspace enriched with voices previously silenced. He continued, now more passionately, "How much is an engaged, empowered employee worth? They are the backbone of productivity, innovation, and in many cases, our reputation." He felt his footing solidify with every word, the internal battle of doubt receding like footprints washed away by an incoming tide. The resonance of his own transformation hung in the air. As he finished his proposal, silence enveloped the room. Matthias, still contemplating, looked at Jake with an expression that was now unreadable. The enormity of Jake's proposal had added a weight that hung precariously over the meeting, a palpable shift where old patterns threatened to tumble. Jake knew they remained on the precipice. Would the board accept this challenge, or would they hunker down in their established norms, letting his vulnerability remain unmet? The stakes felt nuclear. Jake had dared, but would that dare incur new complications, new naysayers? "Let us vote," Matthias finally stated, signaling a decisive moment, but Jake couldn't shake the feeling that this was merely the beginning of something far more treacherous. What new obstacles would arise from his willingness to speak out? Would he be ready to combat whatever fallout emerged from disrupting the stasis? The questions echoed, resonating with the intensity of the decision hanging in the balance. Jake's heart raced as he awaited the board's reaction. He could sense the air thickening with anticipation, yet an unsettling calm washed over him. This was his moment, an intersection where the ideals he had cultivated collided with the rigid expectations of corporate culture. The vote began. One by one, board members cast their votes, some cautiously, others with an almost imperceptible haughtiness. Each whisper of paper echoed in Jake's mind, amplifying the fear that shadowed his newfound courage. What if they rejected him? What if he was once again just another cog in the corporate machine? When the final tally emerged, Jake held his breath. Matthias, a tall figure of authority, cleared his throat, and the moment expanded with pregnant silence. "The motion passes," he announced, though there was a bitter edge to his voice, as if tasting defeat. Relief surged through Jake, merging with disbelief. They had chosen a path less traveled, a route fraught with potential and peril. But beyond relief was a dawning realization: acceptance was merely a starting point for the fight ahead. How would he bring a culture of open dialogue to fruition without sabotaging his own progress? "Congratulations, Jake," Maria said, a bright smile breaking through the palpable tension. "This is the right direction." "Thank you," he replied, pinching the bridge of his nose. "But we have a lot of groundwork ahead of us. This isn't just about policy, it's about authentic change." As thoughts of strategy began to form, he felt the room's energy shift. Matthias remained, arms still crossed, but the smirk that had once plagued Jake seemed replaced by a guarded respect, though contempt still bubbled beneath. "Don't let this get to your head, kid," Matthias warned, his tone revealing a hint of grudging admiration. "You're in over your head, and there are more eyes on you now than you think." Jake nodded, acknowledging the veiled threat. The shadows of Matthias loomed large in the room, a constant reminder that the road to change would not be smooth. He would have to navigate the minefields of politics and perception, and confidence alone might not suffice. The next days cascaded into a whirlwind of activity. Jake dove headfirst into drafting the framework for their new program. Conversations unfolded with employees, unearthing stories that weren't just powerful, they were palpable. Each encounter illuminated his own path. Blockades constructed from conformity began to crumble. He discovered something about himself during those discussions: empathy was not a weakness, it was his greatest asset. However, not everyone embraced the new direction. A faction within the boardroom saw Jake's proposed changes as a direct threat to their status. Whispered conversations and sidelong glances grew increasingly frequent. Matthias utilized a calculated strategy, rallying dissent among key players in the company who still clung to the old norms. They were growing restless under the newfound pulse of innovation Jake was igniting. The moments of victory were frequently juxtaposed with mounting tension. Jake learned to tread carefully, balancing encouragement with resistance. His meetings began to shift in tone, feeling less like innovative brainstorming and more like skirmishes where hostility masked itself as professionalism. "Remember, people fear what they don't understand," Maria reminded him, her voice a steadying ground during chaotic days. "Expand their perspective, and growth will follow." Still, a gnawing sensation clung to Jake. Perhaps he had bitten off more than he could chew, exposing himself to challenges he wasn't entirely prepared for. Internal doubts resurfaced. Was his push for change merely a desperate grasp for validation? He fought to reshape his fears into focus. If embracing vulnerability became his strength, how could he harness this fear to fuel his resolve? It was a question that needed answering, and time was running short. His determination matched by mounting opposition, Jake sensed the storm of conflict brewing on the horizon. Was he ready to confront the impending battle within the organization? The journey toward transformative leadership was becoming steeper and more perilous than he had imagined, but Jake knew he couldn't turn back now. The challenge ahead was undeniable, and he would have to rise to meet it, or risk losing everything he had fought to create. As he gathered his thoughts for the next steps, a new wave of doubt washed over him. What would Matthias's next move be? He realized he was not merely a leader, he was a target. Would he emerge victorious or become yet another casualty of corporate warfare? Jake's mornings were now punctuated by an air of urgency. As he strategized the best ways to communicate his vision without triggering opposition, a gnawing sense of inadequacy often lingered at the back of his mind. Each day he set out to foster an open dialogue, but the ghosts of corporate cynicism shadowed his efforts. He started reviewing feedback from employees, sifting through the narratives that exposed the deep-rooted frustrations within the organization. Conversations in the hallways grew fraught with whispers, every laugh a mask, every nod a minefield. Resistance cracked like a dam, and Jake began to feel the tremors of dissent reverberating through the company's foundations. "Stay firm on your vision, Jake," Maria reminded him one afternoon, her voice carrying both conviction and concern. Listen to their fears, and address them. You can't lead a charge if the soldiers think they're marching into a cannon. The idea of addressing the fears floating within the office stirred something in Jake. To confront their doubts individually would be more impactful than looking into collective grumbles. That afternoon, he decided to invite himself to lunch with various departments, a small act that would later yield surprising repercussions. Elevating empathy from a personal asset to an organizational necessity became his new goal. His first meeting was with Kyle, a mid-level manager known for his skepticism. Taking a seat across from him at the cafeteria table, Jake felt the weight of the conversation bearing down on him. "Let's talk," he began, keeping his tone both inviting and sincere. Kyle leaned back, arms crossed defensively. "What's there to discuss? You're pushing a vision that doesn't represent our reality. We're just trying to survive in an environment that feels increasingly unstable." The words rang out, stark and unyielding. Jake felt the sting of doubt creeping back in. "I understand that change feels daunting, Kyle," he began cautiously. "But I believe we can reshape our environment. We need your insights to navigate the path." With every conversation that ensued, Jake probed deeper, unveiling layers of resistance hidden within layers of routine. Kyle's frustrations poured forth, straight from the heart. "It feels like you don't see the walls we've built to protect ourselves from the chaos above. Your ideas could crumble what little stability we have left." It was a reality check that struck cold in Jake's chest. "I'm not here to dismantle your support system," Jake replied, voice steadying. "I'm hoping we can build a new one, together. The change needs to feel inclusive, not like a verdict handed down." That candid exchange triggered something deep within him. Instead of crumbling under the weight of turbulence, Jake felt a flicker of resolve ignite. The more he engaged in these dialogues, the more he realized the true role of a leader wasn't merely to impose change but to cultivate possibility. Days turned into weeks as he continued his route of engagement, but Matthias's relentless antagonism loomed ever closer. The glances exchanged in the boardroom grew more intense, hostility cracking open discussions that had once thrived in mutual respect. A new meeting was called, and Jake sensed the air crackle with apprehension. As he entered, he could see Matthias waiting, the very picture of corporate scrutiny. "You've been coasting on goodwill, Jake," Matthias said with an icy smirk. "But our shareholders need results now." Jake tightened his jaw, feeling the pressure build. "I've been securing trust and building a foundation for real change. Transformations take time." Matthias leaned forward, his face a mask of cold calculation. "Time is a luxury you don't have. The board is restless. They want assurances, not your theories." Jake's thoughts raced. Could he mitigate the urgency that threatened to collapse his work? He felt the baiting tension of the room pressing down on him. Rather than submitting to fear, he resolved to rally his new allies to present shared perspectives. Future meetings weren't merely discussions, they were battles for validation and visibility. And just as he began assembling his most heartfelt presentation, a culmination of stories that connected him to employees across the company, a bolt of realization struck that he must confront Matthias directly about these ultimatums. Would he boldly face the challenge of defending his vision against Matthias's relentless push? The stakes heightened. Jake stood at the edge of a precipice, and beyond it lay everything he hoped to build or destroy. The moment for confrontation approached as the tension within the boardroom edged toward boiling. Who would emerge victorious from this clash of leadership philosophies? Jake paced the empty corridor after the meeting, the tension coiling within him like a tightly wound spring. The closer he got to confronting Matthias, the heavier the weight on his shoulders became. Instead of allowing his fear to dictate his actions, he could feel a surge of defiance. He could either crumble or assert himself. His mind drifted to the employees, their voices became a chorus in his head, urging him forward. "What matters is how you navigate this," he muttered under his breath, feeling momentarily bolstered by the thought of their collective frustrations. He had spent weeks gathering stories, carefully crafting them into a narrative that highlighted their aspirations and fears. People didn't want to feel like mere statistics in quarterly reports, they wanted to belong to something bigger than themselves. He planned to use their experiences in his confrontation with Matthias. Building a sturdy bridge between the common despair and his vision felt like the only way to weather the storm brewing on the horizon. Here, in this moment of self-realization, he acknowledged his growth. It was no longer just about him against Matthias, it was about all of them standing together. Determined to strike while the iron was hot, Jake organized a follow-up session with a few trusted colleagues, those who had shared their fears and dreams with him. The air was electric with anticipation as he gathered them around a table stacked high with papers, reports, and projections, proof that they could defy expectations. "We're coming together today not just for our jobs, but for the future of this place," he declared, glancing at each face before him. "For so long, we've allowed the uncertainty above us to dictate our own narratives. Let us reshape that story in this meeting. Let us create evidence of our potential." The atmosphere leaned toward a unified spirit. Ideas flew around the table as each person contributed their thoughts. Frustration turned into clarity, and with it came a renewed sense of purpose. Listening became a cornerstone of their discourse, and in those moments, personal fears were transformed into collective ambition. As discussions intensified, Matthias's earlier coldness resurfaced in Jake's mind. Doubt reared its ugly head, whispering that he might be romanticizing the potential for collaboration while the clock was racing against him. Yet, he felt a burgeoning excitement ignite within him, a belief that they could encapsulate employee sentiments into something that could compel even the most obstinate board members to listen. When the day of the presentation finally arrived, the stakes felt monumental. He entered the boardroom, a mixture of tangible anxiety and determined resolve coursing through him. Matthias was predictably positioned at the head of the table, his steely gaze fixed on Jake, ready for a fight. Jake took a deep breath, grounded by the voices of his colleagues echoing in his mind. "Today," he began, his voice steady despite the tension in the room, "we're not just talking numbers, we're sharing our vision." With each slide that advanced, he wove in stories from his team, illuminating their experiences with authenticity, anchoring them firmly in the company's mission. But even as he presented, as he saw the simmering curiosity beginning to replace some of Matthias's skepticism, he sensed the cornering pressure in Matthias's gaze. The unspoken battle between innovation and traditionalism hung palpably between them. Just as questions started to arise from board members, Matthias interrupted sharply. "Inspirational as these anecdotes may be, they do not account for market realities. We need action, Jake, not stories." Jake stood resolutely, unflinching. "And that's exactly why we need to transform our relationship with these stories into strategies that resonate with our clients. It's time to redefine our market footprint together." He could feel the room holding its breath. The pivotal moment had finally arrived. Would they resonate with the boldness of his new approach, or would Matthias's relentless pragmatism crush what they had built? The tension was tangible, and Jake realized it wasn't just about winning over Matthias, it was about opening the door for a new way of leading. He had to embody that change, walk that tightrope between belief and tangible results. As he locked eyes with Matthias, a flash of competition ignited, serving as a reminder of the transformational power of these moments. This was only the beginning, and he felt fueled by the uncertainty ahead, a wild tenacity guiding his steps deeper into the fray. How could he harness that combination of vulnerability and power to reshape the very fabric of the organization? And would the outcomes he sought be enough to convince the board of his vision's integrity? The answers lay just beyond his reach, tantalizingly close yet distinctly elusive. Jake stood resolutely in the boardroom, the atmosphere electric with tension as he prepared to present his vision one last time. He had poured everything into the past few weeks, armed with the stories and resilience of those he fought for, stories that spoke of struggle, hope, and the unwavering spirit of workers who deserved recognition and fair treatment. This day would mark a turning point, not just for the company but for Jake himself. Looking around the room, he saw familiar, skeptical faces. Matthias's unyielding expression loomed large, a constant reminder of the battle he was up against. Yet, Jake felt fortified by his newfound conviction. He was no longer merely standing up for a policy, but advocating for people whose voices had been silenced for far too long. Today, I invite you all to reconsider our role not just as a corporation but as leaders in our community, Jake began, infusing his voice with urgency and passion. The presentation unfolded as he wove together poignant employee narratives with cold data, illustrating the undeniable link between engaged workers and profit. Each story melded seamlessly into the next, culminating in a message that every person deserved to be heard and valued. Matthias tried to interject. But we have shareholders to think about. Profit margins won't sustain themselves based on empathy alone, he argued, bringing the familiar air of cynicism. And yet, they will die without employing those very values. Jake countered, his voice steady despite the internal tremors of uncertainty. Long-term profitability thrives on loyalty, and loyalty is earned through respect and recognition. We risk losing our edge if we cling solely to outdated paradigms of profit at all costs. The murmurs grew, and for the first time, Jake sensed a crack forming in the board members' stoic facade. Was it possible they were beginning to consider the emotional resonance of his argument? A quick glance at Maria, who sat in the back of the room, lent him strength. Her unwavering support bolstered his resolve. As he continued, he presented the empirical evidence. Companies that fostered open communication and equitable treatment consistently outperformed their competitors in both finances and reputation. This is not just a moral obligation, it's a strategic necessity. Still, Matthias leaned in, sharp and unyielding. All of this sounds lovely, but how will you actually implement it? A whimsical vision doesn't translate to operational efficiency. I've already connected with several department managers and employees, Jake replied confidently, drawing from the numerous lunches and conversations that had exposed the core issues plaguing their culture. We've drafted a concrete proposal for a series of initiatives that encourage transparency, campaigning for fair wages, and open forums where names are attached to the problems. It's tangible, actionable, and we will measure its impact together. The energy in the room was shifting. Unease was giving way to contemplation. Still, the ultimate test awaited. As Jake closed with a powerful call to action, reminding everyone of their collective capacity for change, he could finally feel their internal debates, doubts, and fears bubbling to the surface. Then, Matthias surprised him. Jake, he began, prove it. We'll take the next quarter to pilot your community engagement initiatives. But don't think for a moment that failure will absolve you of responsibility. Jake nodded, the weight of the challenge invigorating him. Agreed, he replied, the warmth of relief igniting within. This was it, and it was only the beginning. As the meeting concluded, he stepped out, feeling transformed. No longer was he the timid leader hesitant to stand up for his beliefs. Instead, he had evolved into a proactive advocate, one who acknowledged the complexities of corporate dynamics while pushing for human-centered change. In the weeks that followed, countless conversations revealed an undercurrent of pent-up desire for connection among the employees. The initiatives that started as a mere proposal grew legs. Jake discovered a profound satisfaction in observing individuals find their own voices. Each day came with new challenges, yet they became opportunities for collaboration, accountability, and trust within the organization. And though Matthias remained an ever-watchful observer, Jake found a way to alleviate the tension by showcasing the transformations occurring in every department. Employee engagement metrics improved, morale lifted, and with each concrete success story, Jake felt an undeniable sense of purpose solidifying within him, a purpose powerful enough to shift the company culture. No longer did Jake measure his life by the veneer of success but rather by authentic leadership, the courage to confront the uncomfortable, and the resolve to bring others along on the journey of growth. He had conquered his past self and emerged a better man, one whose heart resonated with empathy and dedication. Finally, he turned to Maria, who had become an invaluable ally. This is just the beginning, he said, reflecting on their journey together. She smiled, her eyes twinkling with promise. Together, we can continue this work. Jake stepped into the future with unwavering confidence, ready to navigate whatever new challenges lay ahead. He had achieved his personal transformation not just as the CEO of a tech empire but as a leader grounded in integrity and a commitment to uplift those who stood behind him. This was his moment of fulfillment. Now, it's your turn. You need to subscribe now to our channel to not miss the next exclusive emotional stories. Leave a like now to feed the algorithm. It makes a difference. Comment your reactions and theories about the ending below. And don't wait even one more second to share this video with at least 5 friends who need to see this life-transforming conclusion. Your support is vital, and only true fans of personal overcoming stories understand its importance.